Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brother Rehan, just checking that you can hear my voice. Yeah. If you do, please do confirm. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum. You can hear me, please? Let me know. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. Thank you for confirming, Brother Naveed.
MashaAllah, Dr. Irfan, I can see you.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much.
I
Dr.
think
Faisal, how are you?
Dr. Sarai, God bless him.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Yes, I can see Brother Ranjit Sarai Sahab as well. Excellent. So we will be, inshallah, kicking off soon.
If you have a minute, I will.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا.
And what is the matter with you, that you fight not in the cause of Allah and for the oppressed among men, women and children who say, Our Lord, take us out of this city of oppressive people and appoint for us from yourself a protector and appoint for us from yourself a helper.
Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you very much for that. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're trying to keep it as tight as possible because of the time constraints that the webinars pose us. So, just to crack on straight away, the basic theme of the webinar today is, as you know, Kashmir under an unending military siege. It comes in the wake of 73 years of continued military oppression and siege, which is going to be on 27th of October, coming just this week. So we are holding this webinar in relation to that so that we highlight the history of this militarization, the implications it has had on the men, women, and children of Kashmir, and to highlight this issue in a manner that the people of Kashmir, who have been rendered voiceless in so many ways and various forms, to give a one voice to those voiceless people of Kashmir, as well as to provide a platform for people who have a wealth of experience and expertise on Kashmir to speak about it and make people aware and spread this awareness so that in time to come, the way would be paved for a better narrative on Kashmir for the people of Kashmir and for a lasting solution, keeping in view the wishes and aspirations of the people of Kashmir. And Scottish Human Rights Forum, who is the host today of this webinar, is a community organization in Scotland. We work with other community organizations on human rights throughout the world, but you must have seen we are more focused at the moment on Palestine and Kashmir recently, because as I mentioned, the voiceless people of the world are the ones we are focusing on, but our work is not based on any religion or any community or any ethnicity. Scottish Human Rights Forum is as it is, human rights for all humans, and we hope to conduct webinars, seminars, protests like the one we organized yesterday with our partnership organizations as well. And that partnership is a huge part of Scottish Human Rights Forum. So that's one of the most important things, as I mentioned, about Scottish Human Rights Forum. And the other part is to just have our webinar today to start and kickstart. And we, alhamdulillah, by the grace of God Almighty, have got an excellent panel of people who are not only people who are of status and stature in their own places, but they have a wealth of expertise, experience, and absolute amount of information in relation to the issue that we will be talking about today. And the first of them is His Excellency Sardar Masood Khan Sahab. He is the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. He is the 20th president and has been the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir since August 2016. And he has a long career and history of diplomacy. He served as a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pakistan's ambassador to international organizations in Geneva, also Pakistan's ambassador to China, and Pakistan's permanent representative to United Nations in New York. And he has also served a brilliant career in diplomatic service. He's the current constitutional head of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So His Excellency Sardar Masood Khan Sahab, if I may request to speak on the role of Pakistan and Azad Jammu Kashmir's governments in tackling the military strategies of India. Please help us to crack on. President Saab, can I request you to kindly unmute yourself? Sorry, I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Of course, perfectly well, perfectly well. Please go ahead.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dr. Javed Gill, President, Scottish Human Rights Forum. Dr. Irfan Jahangir, who is the moderator. And Dr. Ghulam Nabi Fai, whom I can see on the screen. Mr. Ranjit Singh Sarai. So my greetings from here, Islamabad. As a matter of fact, I traveled today from Muzaffarabad to Islamabad to attend Foundation Day ceremony for Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So I'm so grateful to you for organizing this webinar, and in your introductory remarks, very succinctly, but very comprehensively, you have given us the parameters not only for our discussion, but also about the purposes and principles of your own forum. So I'm reassured by this initiative that you have taken, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir from both parts, the occupied territory and Azad Kashmir, and the people of Pakistan are grateful to you for this initiative. This is, I believe, our first communication with Scotland through virtual means, and I'm so glad to be part of this discussion. Your approach towards holding this seminar has been very, very focused, and you have given each speaker a topic. The topic given to me is role of Pakistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir in tackling military strategies of India. Let me repeat this subject. It is role of Pakistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir in tackling military strategies of India. And here are my thoughts. Let me first outline India's military strategy, which has been there for the past several decades, but which has taken a new shape after August the 5th, 2019. Now, the strategy has many pincers and many dimensions. Let me capture a few. First was the invasion, occupation, and colonization of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir last year. India already had in the occupied territory some 700,000 troops. It beefed up the military presence there, and the current number is 900,000 troops. So massive deployment. As you would know, that many powerful nations on earth, some of whom are represented in the United Nations Security Council, do not have that strength of their standing armies, 900,000 troops. And these 900,000 troops are more than half of the total strength of the Indian Armed Forces. So this massive deployment in the occupied territory, whose population is 14 million, and again, their concentration is in the valley of Kashmir. This is unbearable for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, this kind of mass concentration of armed troops, armed to the teeth, equipped with the latest sophisticated lethal weapons, which are used systematically against innocent civilians, non-combatants, and they justify this deployment, this kind of massive deployment, by saying that they're fighting terrorism. But the fact is that there is no terrorism there. According to their own official figures, the total number of militants, or we call them freedom fighters, those who resist Indian armed presence there, is 230. And their police chief says that these armed forces have already killed 180 militants. So what are they fighting? Some 50 militants, ill-trained and ill-equipped boys who have fled their homes to resist their terror. The terror is being unleashed by the Indian Armed Forces, not by the innocent Kashmiris. This is a fact we continue to distort ad nauseum. But everybody knows the facts. The international media, now the international parliaments, particularly influential parliaments all around the world, they know about it. Second dimension is false flag operations. They would engineer these terrorist attacks and then blame Pakistan so that they can create problems for Pakistan and drive a wedge between Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir, so that Pakistan is not in a position to help the Kashmiris in any form. Isolated, they want to isolate the Kashmiris, they want to eliminate them, they want to brutalize them, they are brutalizing them. So this is the second pincer of their military strategy. The third is systematic killings of youths and blindings and incarcerations, and within the prison houses and concentration camps, torture, and then rape and sexual violence against women. These are all instruments of war, terrorizing children, snatching ideology from them, or trying to change their minds, indoctrinating them with love for India, but they do not succeed. When a child in Kashmir, this is a fact, that when a child starts speaking some communicable language, the first thing he or she says, the child says, is Azadi, freedom, freedom from India. So their strategy, this military strategy is not working. Like Nazis and like the genocidaires of the Balkans, these occupation forces have established concentration camps inside Kashmir and in northern India, where more than 14,000 young boys are incarcerated and they are being tortured and they are being brutalized, as a matter of fact. Another dimension is forcible transfer of Hindu population to the occupied territory and constructing settlements there, changing citizenship and giving citizenship to the new people, new Hindu population, and depriving the Kashmiris, the indigenous Kashmiris, of their citizenship and their rights which were recognized under Article 35A, which was rescinded last year. Prime Minister Modi and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and their military commander, CDS Bipin Rawat, all three forces chiefs have threatened to use nuclear weapons and conventional force against Pakistan, to annihilate Pakistan altogether. and to establish Akhand Bharat. Akhand Bharat means the whole of South Asia goes to India, and they would destroy and demolish all other states in the periphery, in the neighborhood, including Pakistan. They have also gone a step forward, and they have threatened China with military aggression. Along the line of control, of course, we face hostile fire, and there are some 80,000 civilian families there, households, or 600,000 persons who live along the line of control on this side, on the side of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and they are targeted, civilians are deliberately targeted by Indian occupation forces. Their houses are destroyed. They lose their lives, of course, they become disabled for life, and their economies are shattered because of this hostile firing. I think this year, I mean, it's the 10th month, they have already violated the line of control 3,000 times. They have also declared openly a fifth generation warfare against Pakistan, that they would try to create an implosion inside Pakistan. They have penetrated into Balochistan, and they are supporting subversion there. They're supporting and sponsoring terrorism in Northwest Frontier Province, which is now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And they're trying to fan sectarian hatred, and they talk openly about it. I think that the agencies are funding such activities, and they boast about them. What should be our response? What has been our response? And I would say that our response, of course, I mean, we have defended Pakistan along the line of control at the working boundary, Pakistan's international border. The last year, after the developments following India's takeover of Kashmir occupied territory and its annexation, our troops, which are mainly concentrated on the western frontier along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, were relocated to the Kashmir side and to the working boundary and to the international border. And but our main campaign has been political and diplomatic, and I'd say more diplomatic than political. And I'll explain what it means. Because diplomatic campaign is that Pakistan was successful in reviving the issue of Jammu and Kashmir in the Security Council after a passage of 50 years. And this was done with the facilitation and help of China. But this is significant because India peddles a myth that Kashmir is a bilateral issue. But when the issue of Jammu and Kashmir was discussed in the Security Council, although behind closed doors and in informal sessions that belied India's assertion that Kashmir is a bilateral issue. It is not a bilateral issue. So, and then this issue was raised, and the plight of the Kashmiris was raised in the United Nations General Assembly by the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And all state institutions have been very active in the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, and the Security Council itself. Our outreach has been successful, but to an extent. While last year, in the months of August, September, and October, the international community, world parliaments, the European Union, the US Congress, the United Kingdom Parliament also, I mean, we had support from Scottish MPs. There was this groundswell of support for the Kashmiris, the Kashmiri cause, and Pakistan's point of view and Pakistan's stance. The world was not blind. They could see what was happening in Kashmir. So that was a communications bonanza for Pakistan and for the Kashmiris. But let me tell you that I would say that in addition to the efforts that we have made, you have asked a straight question, that how should we counter India's military strategies? And I would say that military signaling from Pakistan's side should continue and would continue. We should also think of asymmetric responses. I'm not talking about essentially military asymmetric responses. There are many other forms of asymmetric responses which can be given to India's aggression. aggression against the people of Jammu and Kashmir, their colonization, their brutalization. I think that Pakistan is already in a state of war. When India attacked and occupied Kashmir last year, it in fact declared a war on Pakistan. It declared a war on the existence of Pakistan. It has tried to delegitimize Pakistan's ideology. And it thinks that Pakistan is guilty of creating a separate homeland for Muslims. And that was a cardinal sin. And that Indian zealots and followers of Hindutva, these fascists, would undo that heroic deed that the leadership of Pakistan had done in the 1940s. There's another fact that I want to highlight, that in Pakistan there should be and there is preparedness for a full spectrum warfare because India has threatened Pakistan with annihilation, and their prime minister has said that, their defense minister has said that these are, I mean, they should be responsible leaders, but they are not. But these are authentic voices. They command the entire strategic and conventional structure of the armed forces. If they are making these statements, then they'll follow up on them. So preparedness for a full spectrum warfare is imperative. In this regard, I think that, I mean, I've been emphasizing this point, that whether these are the young men and women of Azad Kashmir or Pakistan or our diaspora community, they should get involved. Citizens have to be involved. The people of Kashmir and Pakistan have to get involved. The fact is that the people of Jammu and Kashmir occupied territory, they are besieged and they are hobbled and handicapped, and there are these bans on internet communication, there's internet blockade, there's communication blockade. This blockade has been extended in the recent past. So what we are facing is a genocide, a slow-moving genocide, and therefore I want to make a few suggestions before I conclude. One is that we should also, in addition to using or preparing or honing our military weaponry, military means, we should invest in political means to discredit India, to devalue its currency, which is beefed up by America's support or by the Western countries' support. And for that, we have to do an exercise, a massive exercise in international opinion formation, so that we can project the truth about Kashmir. And this should be a civil rights movement. I was in a webinar a short while ago, and I said that this should be a political movement, and this movement should not be led by diplomats or the foreign minister or the foreign secretary or the embassies. I mean, they would do their job in capitals and in headquarters of the multilateral institutions and forums. But it is the responsibility of the political leaders and civil society leaders to create a global movement for the realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And I have cited the examples of the Palestinian movement, but before that, I think that there was anti-Vietnam War movement, there was anti-apartheid movement war, there was a civil rights movement in Kashmir, in the United States, or the United Kingdom itself has seen many transitions which owe their success to the involvement of citizens. I would also urge our friends in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, and all over the world.
Start video.
To start. Can you hear me? I'm going to conclude. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes.
These are my concluding remarks, and that to support an embryonic divestment and sanctions movement that we have started for Kashmir. Can you hear me? I hear some interruptions. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
All right. And last 3 points are. Yes. So there is this information warfare.
वीडियो को
and,
खोल दिया मैंने
जी.
I think
कुछ नहीं आ रहा है।
Qazi Saab's,
All right. All
if I
right.
may request
Then
Qazi Saab to kindly
I
mute
was
his-
talking about information warfare, lawfare. People are familiar with the arguments. I do not want to
लेकिन ब्लैंक
repeat
स्क्रीन
them.
है जो जहां मेरा
One
नाम
thing that
लिखा
we
हुआ
have
है
to do
वहाँ
is
blank
to
screen है।
change this lexicon on terrorism. You know, after 9/11, India started saying that any kind of resistance in the occupied territory is equivalent to terrorism. No, it is not. That's a freedom movement, as a matter of fact, and people have a right to defend their homes, their families, their houses, their neighborhoods, their homeland. And no power on earth can stop from doing that. I mean, of course, there are occupation forces, and because of that reality, Kashmiris cannot fully resist because they are also unarmed or disarmed, and there's no supply chain of weapons for Kashmiris. But this is a stark reality. But we have to internationally change this lexicon, as I have said, about this equivalence between the artificial equivalence between terrorism and freedom fight, or fight for your self-defense, or for right to self-determination. I think that when the international civil society is involved in Scotland or in any other part of the world, it is important that we impress upon India and the international forums that they should hold India accountable for irresponsible statements in regard to use of nuclear weapons. All we want is responsible nuclear stewardship. You know, United Nations Secretary General has been expressing his apprehensions about flare-up of a nuclear conflict, and therefore he advocates disarmament and arms control and so on. And in one of my responses via tweet, I said, look, the only place where a nuclear confrontation can take place is South Asia because of the irresponsible and unaccountable posture of India. So I would say that India should be held accountable for its policy, which can lead to a nuclear Armageddon and whose devastation would not remain confined only to the South Asian region, but it would affect and infect the rest of the world. People have been talking about talks between India and Pakistan. I rule them out under the present circumstances. Principle has been declared that in any future talks, Kashmiris should be included. This is a must. I mean, if there are any negotiations, Kashmiris should be at the negotiating table. But I have also warned that there should be no departure from the UN Security Council resolutions, which recognize Kashmiris as the third party, as the key party. And that any talks that take place between India and Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir should be held under the auspices of the United Nations. Don't trust India. They are perpetrators of the most heinous crimes in a century. And they would use talks as a ruse to mislead world opinion. My final point is that you know, when we address different dimensions of the Kashmir dispute, the legal aspect, the historical facts, and so on, or the nuclear dimension, or the India-Pakistan factor, and so on, you know, we lose sight of the most serious situation in Jammu and Kashmir today. Of course, there's genocide and massacre, but at the same time, India is ruthlessly, relentlessly changing the demographic composition of the territory. And in the past 3 months, they have already imported about 2 million people from India, have given them these domicile certificates. They are in the process of declaring or rendering the Kashmiri citizens stateless. without citizenship. They are queuing up to prove that they are original inhabitants of Kashmir. So that is what we should put on top of the agenda wherever we are holding discussions. I said on many occasions that Israel achieved colonization of Palestine in 102 years. They started this journey with Balfour Declaration in 1918. And then they gave a fait accompli to the rest of the world in 1948. They took 30 years to create pockets of Israel in Palestine. And then after 1967, they started constructing these illegal settlements. They took decades to create this network of illegal settlements in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
I'm extremely sorry. I would have to request for a conclusion already, because I'm pressed for time.
Yes.
I would have to request.
And the last point that I want to say is, in fact, I mean, this was my last point. The last point is that, and I want to leave this message, that nobody, no matter what India says or its extremist leader says, extremist leaders say, Kashmiris have the right to defend themselves under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and many resolutions and many declarations that were passed by the United Nations General Assembly last century. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was His Excellency Sardar Masood Khan Sahib, President Azad Jammu and Kashmir. He very, very clearly delineating the areas. And I'm so thankful, because sometimes we miss out on the points of the actual role. And I'm very thankful to Mr. President for keeping to the topic and actually explaining the topic as well. Our next speaker, as I mentioned, we have a list of very distinguished panelists today, is no stranger to international diplomacy, Mr. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Sahab. Qazi Sahab was appointed as a special representative of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in Sudan. He was also a special representative of the Secretary General in charge of the United Nations Assistance Mission to Iraq. And between 2002 and 2004, Qazi Sahab was Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. He was also Pakistan's High Commissioner to India in 1997, Russia, East Germany, and later to China, all the important players, if you may notice. He was also Director General for Policy Planning Afghanistan, Additional Foreign Secretary for Policy Planning Afghanistan, Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and also so many other diplomatic assignments like Copenhagen, Tokyo, Cairo, Tripoli, and London. As I mentioned, he's no stranger to international diplomacy. So we will be really keen to hear about his important topic of how to reach a Kashmir settlement. Mr. Qazi Sahab, please. If you would kindly unmute yourself as well. I think you're muted. Yes.
Yes, I'm Assalamu alaikum. President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan Sahib, and Dr. Irfan Jahangir Sahib, Dr. Ghulam Nabi Faiz Sahib, Ms. Claire Bidwell, and Ranjit Singh Sarai. Assalamu alaikum. It's good. It's well into the evening here. So, but I think you're just getting into your evening there. And unfortunately, I don't think my picture is coming across. So you'll have to, mine will be like the voice of the crane coming from the sky. But I would like to sort of give a broad personal view on how we might proceed towards some kind of solution. Indeed, as the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir has aptly described as near impossible conditions in which we approach the subject. The Jammu and Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan is as old as modern India and modern Pakistan, you know, since the coming into being in 1947. This has, the peace has broken down on several occasions. There have been several wars. There have been several dialogues and negotiations between Pakistan and India on the subject of Kashmir. But we've always had an absolute deadlock because our narratives, our points of view are totally totally mutually exclusive. There was a short period of time when India did accept the UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir, but afterwards, when it felt it had no hope of winning a plebiscite in Kashmir, it found an excuse to withdraw, and the excuses are very sophisticated, but unfortunately they're not based on any credible or rational ground or argument. They just didn't want to lose Kashmir, even though Nehru had said that he would be enormously grieved were he to lose the plebiscite, but he would respect it because of Indian values and respect for democracy, etc. Well, he never really meant that, as the subsequent events proved. So we've had, with the possible exception of the back channel talks where some interim understandings were achieved, but that even sort of gave way to developments in India and in Pakistan, and therefore there's never been a productive dialogue between the two countries. The two countries have now become nuclear weapons countries, and so the stakes are even more important, especially for the world. The world has a global stake, and even though we are nuclear weapons countries, there's no real nuclear risk reduction sort of negotiations taking place, never has. You know, there are some formalities which we sort of complete in the beginning of each year, but there aren't any doctrines which take account of you know, the danger of being adjacent nuclear weapons powers, where there would be no warning time whatsoever. Within minutes, you know, things could happen and there would be no warning, and therefore that makes it a very unstable situation, because even rumors then can lead to a nuclear conflagration with all its consequences and all. Even despite this situation and the fact that the Kashmir dispute had led to the breakdown of peace and wars and perpetual hostility between the countries, we might well be right to say that the Kashmir dispute as such represented a very serious threat to the peace in our region, but it may have not quite been an existential threat the way they're elicited or listed now in the you know, by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in their yearly you know, countdown, the doomsday clock, you know, which is supposed to sort of be now less than a minute to, or just 100 seconds to midnight. But ever since August the 5th of last year, Kashmir has now become an existential threat, not only to the countries of the region, Pakistan, the Kashmir people, India itself, but also it's become a global threat because, God forbid, in the worst possible case, a nuclear conflagration, it has been estimated by experts, could lead to the deaths of more than 1 billion people around the world. So it is a threat that should sort of really grab the attention of the international community, and particularly the UN, whose 75th anniversary we are celebrating. They should, in particular, and the UN Secretary General certainly has, you know, there's a lot of talk about Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, one being enforceable and the other not. But the fact of the matter is that both of them have the same legal status. One is said to be enforceable and the other's not, but that is not quite true, because under Article 99, the UN Secretary General can bring any any subject or any threat to the peace in a region or whatever to the notice of the UN Security Council if he, in his own opinion and assessment, believes there's a real threat to the peace, which of course is the case in Jammu and Kashmir. It has been always, and today more than ever. This is the existential nature of the threat of Kashmir today, not only to Pakistan and Kashmiri people, but to the world in general. Now, since the the decision of August the 19th was a flagrant violation of international law, because one of the requirements of international law was that this is a subject which is on the agenda of the UN Security Council. It has yet to be resolved. The UN resolutions are extant. They are yet to be implemented, pending which neither India nor Pakistan can unilaterally bring about any changes on the ground there. India has done that. It says it doesn't recognize UN resolutions, but that merely puts it in the doghouse of international law. And we need to take, the world needs to take account of it. The UN Security Council, etc., needs to take account of this, because this is not just one of as the President Masood Khan just mentioned, the only threat that emanates today is not the threat between, an emerging Cold War between China and America. That is a possibility in the longer run. Who knows? And we hope that won't happen. Similarly, during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US, the threat is between India and Pakistan, because India has locked itself into a completely impossible position. It has now denied itself any chance at all of reaching a political solution of this problem by engaging with the Kashmiris of the valley, the Kashmiris of Indian occupied Kashmir, especially since August the 19th. This was the case even before. But after August the 19th, India seems to be embarked on a course that we cannot we cannot convince the Kashmiris to regard themselves as Indian citizens, except for there were very few people who were themselves also put in jail. They've now come out of jail. They're crawling back, to the Indian tent, or going to, saying, please restore Article 370 and 35A, because they were part and parcel of the instrument of accession, which itself was an illegal document, and which the UN passed a resolution refusing to recognize this accession to India. But the danger is that India is moving towards, once again, as the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir said, moving towards a policy of genocide. The Genocide Watch has already issued a genocide alert immediately after the actions taken by Prime Minister Modi, saying that many of the indicators of genocide are far advanced in Indian occupied Kashmir or Indian administered Kashmir. For this poses a problem for Pakistan also. Pakistan seeks a peaceful, legitimate, principled settlement in accordance with the UN resolutions through an ascertainment of the will of the Kashmiri people, of course, through the plebiscite, etc. But that possibility has been completely eliminated. And if India chooses, because its political options have been exhausted and militarily it is overwhelmingly strong, but even through military means it has not managed to permanently eliminate the resistance. Why? Because it's embedded in the people itself. The roots of the Kashmiri resistance are embedded in the Kashmiri people, because those who comprise the resistance are Kashmiris themselves. And more than ever today, it's an absolutely indigenous movement. So this is extremely important. Now, if India proceeds towards genocide. And of course, we must remember this genocide has happened before. In the case of Jammu, when they converted a majority Muslim area, which was Jammu, into a Muslim minority area through the expulsion and murder of its own Kashmiri Muslims resident in Jammu. So it is something which has happened before, and they appear to be launched upon it, even though, as the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir has said, it seems to be a slow moving. And of course, it is a cumulative process. And the warnings that Genocide Watch issues they also have certain degrees. You know, there's a genocide alert, a genocide warning, and then a genocide emergency, which is when ultimately a mass massacre is either happening or is in the offing. And we are approaching that stage. The question for Pakistan is that Pakistan's own existence and stability would be threatened were India to perpetrate genocide in Indian occupied Kashmir. That would present an enormous problem for Pakistan, and Pakistan could not possibly survive without responding to it. And you know, India and Pakistan are nuclear weapons countries. Now, nuclear weapons, at least as far as Pakistan are concerned, is meant to deter aggression, deter a threat to Pakistan's survival. But Indian policy in Indian occupied Kashmir, in total contravention of the rights of the people and international law, would constitute an immediate threat to the survival of Pakistan, and Pakistan would need to react accordingly. Now, what do we do in such a situation? What do we do? My own view, and many people may not agree with me, but my own view is that we have to have a multi-track position. I know Pakistan is very logical and right when it says that it cannot enter into any dialogue with India unless India reverses its position of August the 19th, 2019. But in my view, India appears unlikely to do that. And there are many friends of ours, including China, who say, probe the possibilities of dialogue. Now, I believe Pakistan should probe those possibilities, absolutely probe them. There is very, very little chance of Modi responding positively to that. But it is essential for Pakistan to show the world that despite these enormous provocations, Pakistan is willing to probe the possibility of an amelioration of the situation in occupied Kashmir, particularly with regard to its human rights and the prospect of genocide. And for that purpose, despite these provocations, Pakistan is willing. At the same time, Pakistan will need also, with the assistance of the international community, to deter India from proceeding towards a genocidal solution of the Kashmir situation, which would, as I have just said, confront Pakistan with impossible choices, which it would have to consider taking for its own survival. We then need to ensure the legitimate resistance, the survival of the legitimate resistance, and this is in accordance with international law. People who have been forcibly deprived of their internationally acknowledged rights have the right to struggle, to armed struggle, to seek assistance for that struggle, and to seek armed resistance. This is part of international law. It is only after 9/11 that the great power, particularly the US and some of its allies, have sought to equate such resistance with terrorism. That is an emphatic contradiction of international law. People have an inherent right, the Kashmiri people, the Palestinian people have an inherent right to resist the forcible deprivation of their fundamental right of to self-determination. And after the recognition by the UAE and Bahrain of Israel, or the decision to normalize relations, the UN Secretary General said the only settlement that the UN will recognize is one based on the implementation of the UN resolutions, which includes recognition of a two-state solution and all. Similarly, for Pakistan and India, to be able to resolve this dispute of Kashmir with Kashmiri participation, and even though India will refuse their participation, saying they're all Indian citizens, the modalities can be found whereby Kashmiri participation is guaranteed, because it is absolutely essential, and we must go down that route. But the international community can't sit back and say, well, this is just one more problem. We've got far more urgent problems. We've got COVID, we've got the climate change, we've got all kinds of things to deal with Kashmir, because Kashmir is now not just a static deadlock. It is a dynamic deadlock which is heading towards genocide and possibly war, with a global stake in the prevention of this war. So I believe that if we are able to, and elicit a positive response from India as a result of Pakistan's multi-track policy. And I think we need also to be able to unite Kashmiri opinion through a proper understanding and implementation of Article 257 of the Pakistan Constitution, which says that the relationship, should the Kashmiris decide for Pakistan, the relationship between it and Pakistan will be in accordance, exclusively in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people. They do not have to follow the province-center relationship as exists within Pakistan itself, if that is their choice not to. They can have anything because that is guaranteed by Article 257. This ensures a unity of approach between those struggling for their right of self-determination and Pakistan, which is a party to the dispute in support of the Kashmiri right of self-determination. So this, I believe, is the way not only to try and avoid genocide, avoid war, but open up the possibilities of a new chapter in Indian and Pakistan relations, would enable them to face the challenges of the 21st century more effectively. This looks like an impossible, humongous task. But if you look at the challenges confronting the world today, each one of them, including a Green New Deal, to avoid the fatal ravages of climate change, each one of these are unprecedented. The world has never cooperated on that basis. So the fact that India and Pakistan would need to come together in some sort of cooperative manner to resolve an issue which threatens to be a catastrophe on the same level as climate change and nuclear war and all the other global threats doesn't mean that it cannot be done. It simply has to be done because our existences are at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Qazi. That's an excellent insight into from a perspective of a person who is really has been such an exclusive, diplomat from all aspects. Thank you very much for that. We are again, I'm really conscious of the time. We will be showing a very short video about Kashmir, and then we'll continue with the rest of the panels. Welcome back. So our next panelist is the most well-known figure, if I may say, Dr. Ghulam Nabi Fai, on Kashmir issues. He himself belongs to the occupied part of the Kashmir. He's the Secretary General of the Washington-based World Kashmir Awareness Forum. He's also the member of the Board of Directors, Istanbul-based the Union of NGOs of the Islamic World. He was awarded the Republican Senatorial Medal of Freedom in 2005 and the American Spirit Medal in 2007, the highest and most prestigious honors indeed. Dr. Fai has been a leading spokesman for the Kashmir, as you know, for over decades now. And I don't think any panel is complete without Dr. Fai when we talk about Kashmir. If you would please continue with the webinar at your turn, please. Sorry, the topic that Dr. Fai is discussing today is history of militarization of Kashmir and the way forward. Thank you very much.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you very much, Dr. Javed Gil Sahab, Dr. Irfan Jahangir Sahab. It's an honor to be with Excellency President Masood Khan Sahab, Excellency Ashraf Jahangir Sahab, and Ranjit Singh Sarai Sahab, and Carol Bidwell. In fact, I was just listening to her. She was asking everybody to come to a program on Friday. I do not know how many people showed up. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic I was given is the history of militarization in Kashmir and the way forward. First of all, let me tell you that the militarization of Kashmir did not start on August 5th, 2019, when Article 370 and 35A were abrogated. And the militarization of Kashmir also did not start in the latest phase of Kashmiri freedom struggle, which started in 1989. The militarization of Kashmir started in 1846, 173 years ago, when British East India Company sold the whole nation of Kashmir to then the Maharaja Gulab Singh for an amount of 7.5 million Nanak Shahi currency. That is equivalent to $51,000. Let me repeat. The whole nation of Kashmir was sold for an amount of $51,000. The militarization during the period of Dogra, it was very harsh, it was very painful, it was very shameful. That militarization did not include only the political victimization, it also included the cultural assassination and economic exploitation. I remember L. Boring, who was the private secretary of British Viceroy Lord Canning. He said there were taxes on everything: the sheep, the cattle, the fruit, the vegetables, even the marriages. And Sir Walter Lawrence, in his book, The India We Served, it was published in 1878, on page number 28, he writes, there were taxes on everything except two things: the air you breathe and the water you drink. So ladies and gentlemen, coming back to the current militarization of Kashmir, one of the internationally known human rights activists who comes from Calcutta, India, Arundhati Roy, she wrote on October 23rd, 2019, in fact, it is in a video. She said the 900,000 Indian Army has made Kashmir the largest militarized zone in the world. Pankaj Mishra, an Indian Hindu journalist, he wrote in Daily Guardian of London, once known for its extraordinary beauty, the Valley of Kashmir has become today the biggest occupation zone in the world. Dr. Karen Parker, very important NGO in the United Nations, one of the internationally known human rights lawyers from San Francisco, she wrote, Kashmir has become the largest army concentration anywhere in the world. Harinder Baweja, an Indian non-Muslim journalist, she wrote in India Today, ladies and gentlemen, let me quote, everywhere there is pain in Kashmir. There is darkness everywhere. Kashmir has lost its magic. Kashmir has lost its mystique, unquote. Justice Bahauddin Farooqi, when he came to America, he was speaking here in the think tank. There were more than 100 people. They couldn't believe that such a wise person coming from Kashmir. He was the Chief Justice of Kashmir High Court, Justice Bahauddin Farooqi. He said herein, he also wrote, and I quote, there is only one thing in Kashmir, that is suffering and suffering, nothing else but the suffering of the people of Kashmir, unquote. But I'm so delighted that I was listening to Excellency Jahangir Kazi, because he has a really vision. My topic is what is the way forward, but before going there, I would like to say just a word. about a very important resistance movement in India. It is so organized. It is so disciplined. They have office not only in Washington, not only in New York, in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Canada, London, and Geneva. It is the Khalistan movement. I met with Dr. Amar Singh Sahab. He is the president of Khalistan Center, Washington. He told me that this year, 2020, is the year of their referendum. So we must thank the people who belong to Khalistan movement, and in fact, we must join the hands. Now the way forward. I'm not going to tell you what Sayyid Ali Gilani is telling me, what Muhammad Yasin Malik is telling me, what President Masood Khan is telling me, what is the way forward. I am going to tell you what Veer Sanghvi has told me. Veer Sanghvi is the editor-in-chief of Hindustan Times, former editor-in-chief of Hindustan Times. That means he's not a man on the street. He's a person who shapes or tries to shape the policy of India. He wrote in Hindustan Times, why do you hang on to Kashmir? If the people of Kashmir do not want to be with us, let us have a referendum. If they want to join us, they are most welcome. If they do not, we have no moral authority to force them to be with us. Then he wrote in Hindustan Times, ladies and gentlemen, it is easy to write in New York Times, ladies and gentlemen. It's not easy to write in a newspaper in New Delhi. He said, it is the time to think unthinkable. Swaminathan Iyer, another Indian in Times of India, which is the second most important newspaper of India. Again, not easy to write in Times of India. He was really reflecting the aspirations of the people of Kashmir, and he's not a Kashmiri. What did he write? He said, we have given the pledge to the people of Kashmir to have a plebiscite in Kashmir. Let us have one. Give the people of Kashmir three choices. It is Muhammad Yasin Malik saying, it is Swaminathan Iyer. Give the people of Kashmir three choices: India, Pakistan, and independence. Then he says, let the people of Kashmir decide, not the armies of India or Pakistan. The way forward was given by Justice Tarkunde. He was the Chief Justice of Bombay High Court, ladies and gentlemen. He was the president of Union of Indian Civil Liberties. He is really known as the father of civil liberties in India. He said the best way to have the solution of the Kashmir is to have a plebiscite in Kashmir. P. Chidambaram, who is an Oxford University graduate, and he was the Minister of Interior and Minister of Finance. And he said in the Indian Parliament, if you want the people of Kashmir to love India, let us have a referendum. So the way forward, ladies and gentlemen, is Prime Minister India, Nehru, and then the Prime Minister of Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah, they had the agreement. They failed because they sought to bypass Pakistan. Pakistan and India had Tashkent Declaration, Simla Agreement, Lahore Agreement, and whatnot. They failed because they sought to bypass us, the people of Kashmir. So time has come. Until last year, ladies and gentlemen, we were saying there should be tripartite dialogue between India and Pakistan and the people of Kashmir, and the people of Kashmir are the principal party. But now the scenario has changed. It can never be tripartite dialogue because China is there, ladies and gentlemen. It has to be the five-party dialogue: India, Pakistan, Kashmir, China, and obviously, and the United Nations. My only point is, what I am saying, what Ambassador Jahangir Qadhi was saying, we are not saying something which is happening in the utopian world. How honored we are that the people of Kashmir. Yes, it is true that the world powers are not helping us the way we deserve it. But a person no less important than the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. The post is very important. But she has also been the elected president of Chile. She recommended to both India and Pakistan. What did she say? You must respect the right to self-determination of the people of Kashmir. Then she said much more important than that. It is in the report, ladies and gentlemen, 43-page report. Kashmiri people should be the part of the dialogue and the talks. How can you talk about Kashmir? Can you believe it? You are talking about the Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. We are the Prince of Denmark. United Nations do not give the right to Imran Khan Sahib, did not give the right to Narendra Modi. The right was given to the people of Kashmir irrespective of their religious freedom or religious affiliation, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, whatnot. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, what do we need to do? I am sure we have the pen, we have the intellect. I am sure that you know the name of Burhan Wani, General Siptan of India. He said on NDTV, Burhan Wani had the gun, but he never used it. I'm not saying it. General Siptan, who served in Kashmir for 4 years, what was he doing? He was using a pen and intellect. Social media. Please do use social media. And what are you going to write on social media? Tell them that Kashmir is the only region in the world, only region, which shares borders with 3 nuclear powers of the world. India is fighting with China on one side. India is fighting with Pakistan on another side. We just listen to Ashraf Jahangir Kazi. If there is a nuclear catastrophe, 1.5 billion people are going to be affected. So the world powers, so United Nations, so the Great Britain, the United States of America, they should intervene not only for the sake of Kashmir, they should intervene for the peace and security of South Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, South Asia, 1.5 billion people. 1.5 billion people is 1/5 of total human race. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, as always, Dr. Ghulam Nabi Faisal, for those pearls, which are really, really important and a direction for not only the political heads, but also for the common people who can, inshallah, take a lot from them. Thank you very much for that. The next on line is a well-known figure in UK, Mr. Afzal Khan, our MP. He is a member of the UK Parliament for the Manchester Gorton constituency since June 2017. He was formerly Lord Mayor of Manchester for the year 2005-2006 and a member of the European Parliament from 2014 to 17. He himself is a Kashmiri and feels the pain and misery of Kashmiris inflicted by the occupation. He is the vice convener of the cross-party parliamentary group in Westminster on Kashmir as well. And the topic and role is the role of Britain in resolving Kashmir issue.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to you all. Can I first of all thank Tariq-e-Kashmir and Dr. Javed Gilsab for giving this invitation to me to join you, and please accept my apology that I'm not being able to join you. And the reason is I'm in actually Islamabad attending this very similar event, which is to mark the 27th October, the Black Day for the Kashmiri people, when the Indian forces occupied Kashmir. Now, you have a number of speakers here who have probably gone through the history and the difficulties, the suffering that we have seen throughout this 73 years. The sad reality is this suffering has actually gone worse, especially from the 5th of August last year, when the Indian forces sort of increased another 200,000 in the pretext of the development of Kashmir. The very sort of relationship which was set up by the Indian government in the occupied Kashmir, which was supposed to be temporary in light of course, the UN resolutions as well. They just put all that aside against the international law. And in fact, the truth is they are now an occupying force. This is a stark reality. We've seen this mass blinding, mass killing, mass rape. We've seen the economic destruction. Even last year alone, something like 5 billion losses were there. And probably for me, most importantly, point is the young people of occupied Kashmir, their whole future is being destroyed. And through that, I suppose, the future of the Kashmir. I just don't understand this ideas of the Indian government that they want to develop Kashmir. It's a funny way of developing Kashmir. So what is it that we can do? I just want to focus, I suppose, not on the global context, because there's a lot can be done, which we all need to help with that, but just focusing more on this UK side. I think the first thing to say would be that outside Kashmir, we have the largest population of Kashmiri heritage here in the UK. So that is actually a very powerful tool for us. And we need to utilize this in a country where we are living all over in different cities. We have a huge contribution here, and we have a huge relationship with different communities. So one of the things I would say straight away is we need to work on this Kashmir cause as a community as a whole. And when I say community as a whole, of course, it's a rich, diverse community, the Kashmiris themselves, but we need to take everyone with us. So that idea of unity is pretty important. And that also means really using every individual, the whole family I'm getting at. Because if we don't do that, just leave it just the man folk, that's really not good enough. I usually give an example of a boxer. If you tie one hand, how good a boxer are you going to be? So we need to make sure our sisters are involved as well. And equally, the most importantly, I think the most able people are the young people. This day and age, with this media, social media, all that goes on, they are actually best equipped. So we need to be making sure we bring them along with our struggle. And I think the second point I would say is building alliances. There's lots of different groups who operate here. There are a lot of different communities. Britain is an amazing country. My own city of Manchester has over 200 languages. So that shows the richness, diversity. So we need to be building alliances. That, I think, is another really important work to do. Within the country, there are lots of different areas that we can work. And one of the most important work I've seen is the trade union movement. They are very powerful, they're very strong, they cross the board, and they do play a very important role in the British society. And their role can be measured actually, not only what they do here, but equally internationally. And South Africa apartheid is a good example to see what a powerful role that the trade union movements played. So I think this is certainly one of the areas where we need to take this struggle, this current suffering of the Kashmiri people to the trade union movements. Many of us are members of different trade unions as well, the places where we work. So we should be actively participating in that. And then I think the second point I would say is a lot of other human rights organizations. Again, we need to work with them. I mean, one of the simple good techniques I've seen is one of our sisters who's a teacher from Scotland, I think she is, how she's had this tea with Kashmir. Very simple idea, but actually very effective. So this is sort of ideas that we need to be using to reach out into the community. Now, Parliament, of course, is very powerful. And we all are connected with our member of parliaments. And this is the connection we need to strengthen. We need to be visiting. We have a very powerful APPG on Kashmir in Parliament, which is cross-party. So one of the simple things that you can do to strengthen this message is to go and visit your MP and ask your MP, why don't they join APPG in Kashmir? Because the stronger the APPG in Parliament we have, the stronger will be the voice of the Kashmiri people. Now, one of the other things which I think need to be thinking about is how do we strengthen the Kashmiri voice within the political parties? Now, we have a strong group in the Labour Party. Recently, we've heard that there's a group have been formed in the Conservative Party as well, and I'm sure there's will be one in the Liberal Democrat Party. So Scottish National Party is here we should be thinking about. So all these political parties, actually, within them, I think we should have a voice, and that voice of the Kashmiris there as well. And then we need to be thinking about changing the policy, and that will be one of the best ways of actually changing those policies of the government and the major parties. Because every time now you ask them, they talk about bilateral issue. Now, bilateral issue is really not good enough. We really need to put the Kashmiris at the heart of this, and it's their voice which needs to be listened to. And this is what the UN is all about as well. This is how we're going to have peace as well. Magnitsky sanction is another good one, which recent legislation which has come through Parliament. We should be now pressing the governments on that, and we should be then pressing this through your MPs. So that's the sort of work that we need to do. There's a lot we can do. That responsibility is on each one of us. Please use your efforts, use your voice for the benefit of the Kashmiri people. Thank you again, Dr. Javed Gill Saab and Tariqa Kashmir, for the wonderful work throughout the year that you do for the voiceless Kashmiri people. You will have my support always. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a recorded message. We're really grateful to Mr. Afzal Khan Saab. Despite he having to leave the country, he did leave that message for us. Our next panelist is again very well known among the human rights as well as self-determination quarters, Mr. Ranjit Singh Sarai. He is a coordinator of Self-Determination Council of the World Sikh Parliament UK. He's a lawyer and a long-standing campaigner for the application of the right of self-determination as a fundamental human right, as well as a means of peaceable conflict solutions, a steadfast and vocal supporter of Kashmiri self-determination, and he has urged international intervention to end India's lockdown, deliver a plebiscite, and defuse the explosive situation created in the region by Indian aggression. So without further ado, I would request Mr. Ranjit Singh Sarai Sahab to kindly speak on the topic, oppression of Kashmiris and right of self-determination. Mr. Sarai. I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Sat Sri Akal, Salam Alaikum, good evening to all the fellow panelists and to everybody who's watching. It's been fascinating to hear these different perspectives, all of which are very illuminating as to the issues and the problems before us and the challenges before us in relation to Kashmir. I've been asked to address the topic of oppression of Kashmiris and the right of self-determination. So I will focus on those lines. Initially, in terms of the oppression of the Kashmiris, it's pretty much obvious to the international community generally. Not just Kashmiris, not just Sikhs, not just Pakistanis, Indians, not just people in South Asia, the entire world community is fully aware of the oppression of the Kashmiris. It's absolutely unacceptable oppression. We've seen that ramped up, obviously, since August 2019, with an inhuman, degrading lockdown of millions of innocent civilians in a purely political project, which is a colonial project of India to, in effect, unilaterally appropriate territory which is internationally disputed territory. So we have the lockdown in terms of the oppression, with everything that's gone with that, the denial of individual freedoms, the lack of communication, the shutdown of peaceful political activity. Behind of that, there's always been in the background in Kashmir and likewise in Punjab in relation to the Sikh nationalist struggle for self-determination. There are black laws that have been enacted, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, various other acts, all of which have imposed laws that breach international standards on the freedom, the right to life, the right to be free of unjust and arbitrary detention, the right to be free of torture, the right to be free of crimes that are essentially crimes against humanity. We've seen sexual violence used as a means of repressing the civilian population. And essentially, I think we're looking at around 150,000 deaths of civilians so far caused by the Indian security forces in Kashmir. We look at the suppression of the media, which again was flagged up by the UN earlier this week. We look at the shutdown of human rights organizations. It's been pretty shocking, really, to see how Amnesty International have been forced to shut down operations because of the deliberate targeting and the victimization that they've been subjected to by the Indian state over recent years. So the oppression is there. His Excellency spoke about the lexicon. Now, I think the key thing about the lexicon and the narrative that I think we need to develop, when I say we, I'm talking about all those who have a genuine interest, who are sincerely interested in solving the Kashmir issue. The lexicon and the narrative, for me, moving forwards, must be around self-determination. We talk about all the, I've listed many of them, the individual human rights that have been breached. But it's clear to everybody, and it's clear to the UN, which has been declared this several times over the course of the UN's development and over the course of the progress of international humanitarian law. For example, the 1966 Covenants on Civil and Political Rights. It's clear to everybody that individual human rights cannot be guaranteed without the collective human right of self-determination being respected. Now, it's that self-determination collective human right, it's the narrative and the lexicon of self-determination that we need to bring to bear, not only in the court of international public opinion, but potentially in the court, in the international legal courts, and ultimately to the international negotiating table, whether that's in relation to Kashmir or the other conflicts that have been caused by India's position on self-determination. So the core issue here is indeed self-determination. The UN resolutions on Kashmir are underpinned by the concept of a plebiscite, i.e. self-determination by the people of Kashmir themselves. We've had two reports over the last couple of years by the High Commissioner on Human Rights, which Dr. Fay talked about recently, just on this program, on this webinar, about the UN itself advocating that both India and Pakistan need to resolve this conflict in accordance with the right of self-determination of the people of Kashmir. So the UN is saying this. International law is saying this. I talk about the 1966 Covenants on Civil and Political Rights. But let's look at India's position, because we do need to crack this narrative about India's position so that we can take the narrative about conflict resolution forwards. So India is saying that the right of self-determination does not apply to the Indian state, to peoples or nations caught or locked into the Indian state or to Indian-controlled territory. And they say this officially. This has been, when India signed up to the 1966 Covenants, they formally entered a reservation at the UN. The UN, and that reservation said that the right of self-determination does not apply to any situation outside of the traditional decolonization process of the 60s and the 70s. The UN itself has told India that's not correct. The UN committee, Human Rights Committee, made up of international lawyers, has since India acceded to the 1966 Covenants, formally demanded that India withdraw that reservation. And let me bring everybody up to date on that situation. As recently as August 2019, the Human Rights Commission again requested that India withdraw that reservation against the right of self-determination. So India is in the dock here. India is in the wrong. I'm not saying that. Other members of the panel are not necessarily saying that. It's the UN saying that. And just this week, let me bring you even more up to date. Just this week, when the Indians gave a statement at the UN in connection with non-self-governing territories, just this week, their spokesperson, their statement said that, and this was an oblique reference to Pakistan, by the way, and therefore obviously to the Kashmir issue. So they said, since self-determination they've said it continues to be, that's the Pakistani delegation they're referring to, and they refer to the agenda of the UN and saying that self-determination cannot be used as a justification for undermining the territorial integrity of a member state. Now, that's flatly in contradiction with what the UN Human Rights Committee has said, as I've just mentioned. It's flatly in contradiction to what the High Commission on Human Rights have said in those two reports, calling upon India and Pakistan to respect the right of the Kashmiris to self-determination. So India is in the wrong. For whatever reason, the international community has not latched onto this. It could be the fault of people like us, not bringing this to the attention of the world. And I'm not necessarily talking about states here, I'm talking about public opinion. Public opinion needs to be educated that India is in the wrong on self-determination. And it's not just on Kashmir, repeated in Punjab, especially during the 1980s and 90s, when the sex struggle for self-determination, which is ongoing, because that conflict has not been resolved, was also suppressed by massive state terrorism and genocide. And it's been done in with the Nagas, with the Assamese. This is a systemic problem of India. We need to bring it to the world's attention. Moving forward, I would explore one other facet, which I think Dr. Fay very correctly referred to himself, that there is a need for all of the affected nations in the region to come together on a single platform, to stand shoulder to shoulder. Sikhs with Kashmiris, I'm talking on behalf of the World Sikh Parliament, we have consistently supported the right of the Kashmiris to self-determination. And we would expect others to respect our right to self-determination and indeed to support us. So I'm calling on Kashmiris, I'm calling upon governments, Pakistan, China, and indeed wider afield, further afield, to respect the right of self-determination of the Kashmiris and of the Sikhs. It's a message that has to be driven home in South Asia, because it's important. We must force home this message that the only conceivable method of peaceful conflict resolution in South Asia, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's Punjab, Indian controlled Punjab, whether it's in the Northeast, the only conceivable peaceful method of conflict resolution is the implementation of the right of self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is so important. And I must highlight, apart from the most important message about how a right of self-determination is the key, also for those people who are in UK, just to mention this important point which Mr. Singh raised, is right to be free from detention, right to be free from torture. People in this part of the world wouldn't even think that that has to be a right, but people for like Kashmiris and the Sikh in India, for them it's a reality that, you know, we're not free from all this. So thank you very much for bringing that point to highlight as well. The last but not the least is Miss Claire Bidwell. She is the co-founder of Let Kashmir Decide, and that's what we're trying to do in this panel. Let Kashmir Decide through the self-determination. She's a teacher by profession and human rights activist. As a result of her visit to India and subsequently learning about the suffering of the people of Kashmir, she devoted her efforts to support the right of self-determination for Kashmiris. And we had a very wonderful turnout yesterday about a car rally in Scotland, urging BBC to break their silence on Kashmir, which was very well attended. I was a part of that. Ms. Claire Bidwell, please go through with the role of international NGOs in maintaining medical and food supplies in Kashmir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists and guests. Yeah, I mean, this was quite a challenging question for me, and it was obviously quite good for me because I had to do some research into it, because a lot of my work is about raising the awareness of issues, and obviously I hadn't looked too much into the role of the NGOs. So, and in uncovering that, then it's looking at, I mean, there's three issues to it, and to me, and one is the, you know, the ground realities. First of all, the ground realities there are challenging for any NGO or for anybody to deal with anyway, because as people have been saying earlier, you know, the atrocities that we are dealing with are not something that the everyday person would even have in their vocabulary, you know. So we're looking at the mass rapes, we're looking at enforced disappearances, we're looking at, you know, mass graves, you know, unknown graves, the rapings, the blindings, the tortures, the mental stress, the mental pressure on all of that as well. So the physical torture, the mental abuse is a lot, you know, that's needed support, that's needed worked with. So on top of this, India, of course, are not making it easy at all. So with the rapid demographic change, and obviously, I mean, to me, it is a genocide is happening already, and that ethnic cleansing. So their work's cut out. I mean, it was just a few days ago, the Office of High Commissioner, the Human Rights Commissioner, was expressing her concern about the Regulations Act that is in place, which is making it very difficult for funds to be sent and come across, you know, to India. So it's not as straightforward. It taps into what the last speaker said, you know, Amnesty International in India being closed down, citing it as financial irregularities. One of the other things that they're facing, the NGOs in India, is also coming under the UPA Protections Act, or the, trying to think of the name of it, but one of their laws, their antiquated laws, whereby anybody protesting or standing up for the rights of the citizens are being arrested, and some of them are still arrested and under there. So it's made very, very difficult. And so the role that they're having to do is, I mean, the positive is that the Kashmiris, this is nothing new to them. You know, the conditions that they've been living under, the occupation, the oppression, is as it meant they've had to create good community groups, you know, good support systems. And certainly, you know, with the communication blackout that was enforced after the lockdown for 8 months, that made it very difficult for, you know, any news or anything to come in or out. Newspaper reports, media reports are just being blocked all the time. So it's very hard to ascertain what's needed. So I think, you know, looking at it, one of the biggest roles for the NGOs is to research, what we've not got is, you know, hard proof, concrete research in the area as to what is actually happening. You know, we're not able to get humanitarian aid in there. So some strategies and some research, which with the good communities, the links that they've got with the Kashmiris, you know, they can help to create that, because we're talking, we know, you know, we're needing supplies there like ambulances, we're needing the transport, we're needing medical facilities, we're needing food. I mean, back in 2016, after the martyrdom of Burhan Wani, you know, they shut down all the local NGOs, so making it very, very, very hard, and people having to leave out food outside tents and all sorts. So yeah, it's very challenging situation, very difficult. So the researching, and I think then this brings us into, you know, I know I'm delighted to say it's on Amnesty UK's agenda for this year. You know, a member here, somebody that's a Kashmiri, has been working really hard, and so lots of us supported, and it's on Amnesty International's agenda. So and one of the things they're focusing on is trying to get humanitarian aid in there. So with that in mind, I think the NGOs, part of their role is to, you know, they've got to me, look outwards and not just inwards. And I think they're going to have to perhaps, hopefully, take in some role in reaching out to the international community as well, and working, you know, with the diaspora, with everybody, with all, you know, everything that everybody has said this afternoon is all working towards solutions. And it would be wonderful to think that these NGOs and everything as well could be part of that. So working initially on research and bringing together, you know, some ground realities, what the facts, the figures, what's actually happening. And then obviously on top of this, you know, we've got COVID. So that's making it, you know, just incredibly difficult. You know, hardly any health apparatus there, health facilities there. So everything, you know, it's hands on deck. I found it's quite traumatic actually when you delve into it and you think about it, because it is something out here that we all went to this illegal occupation, and we probably don't even know the truthful facts, you know, of it. So I mean, my biggest thing around that, you know, involved in lobbying as well. So, and again, the self-determination being the key in terms of lobbying wherever they can, because the bigger issue for me was, if Kashmiris have been given their right for self-determination, or they had their right for self-determination, they wouldn't be having, you know, this huge humanitarian crisis to deal with. And so those resources that then come out of them, you know, to that, it all becomes, you know, the economic value that the world, the United Nations, the countries, you know, they put more value on the money than the human lives. And so it's very frustrating then that it goes to organizations to have to pick up the pieces and feed these vulnerable. So there's lots of challenges in there and around it, and I think there's lots of questionings away. But I think possibly the biggest is to try and work with the Kashmiris from the, you know, the ground. Nobody knows better than the Kashmiris what they are experiencing, and as difficult as it is for them to get the information out, if there are, you know, NGOs on the ground, but the ones that are in there working with them to find out what the needs are, I think is one of the biggest, you know, the crucial things. And it's, I mean, it's so difficult to get aid through to India anyway. So, you know, I think supporting networks, talking, dialogue, giving you're supporting the Kashmiris as much as they can to support one another and help one another is in there too. So that's really, you know, the way forward on that, and just that the challenge of it, the difficulties of it around the laws that are coming in to make it hard for them, and the restricting of the, you know, media blockade, as it were. I mean, the other one, of course, is sanctions. I mean, I think pushing for boycotts of India and sanctions should be high on everybody's agenda. And I think that's something that we could all come together to do and push through. I mean, within my work, it's trying to raise awareness amongst the common people, bridge that across, because it's very difficult when the media are so silent, and the people in the West, you know, we're doctrinated into our societies, and people are just going about their business. If they don't know, they can't help. So the NGO's role as well is to raise that awareness of what's going on, you know, raise their voices, let people know, whether it's through advertising. So, you know, Amnesty and that, those that are on the inside and are out there internationally, you know, can raise their voice, reach out to people and others, and boycotts would be massive. You know, hit India where it hurts, because that's the language they understand, is the language of money. So let's hit them right where that hurts, and that would actually have a really big impact, I think, on health supplies and medical supplies for the people of Kashmir. So yeah, I think that's probably my contribution for this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that very succinct, clear and focused message for that. And I must just explain that, you know, sometimes people worry about making people aware and how they are. I've got really good news. Since yesterday, remember we did a joint program with Claire and Scottish Human Rights Forum, and of course other organizations as well. So the Scottish Human Rights Forum's chairperson contacted the head of news BBC Scotland yesterday through Pauline McNeill. And the good news is that, and Claire knows this, that they have agreed on a formal meeting soon to discuss the issue of why they are not covering human rights abuses in Kashmir. So the awareness does work. You just have to persevere, and you have to try harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I must say that, you know, a big thank you to all the panelists, but please don't go anywhere as yet. I know we are about 8 minutes already ahead of the time that we had proposed, but I didn't want to stop any of the panelists because the discussions were really, really valuable. I've got a couple of questions for two panelists, so I'll crack on with the first one. That is for Mr. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Saab, that the point that he highlighted: how can the threat of nuclear clash in South Asia on Kashmir and its consequences, how can that be emphasized before the world community to convince them of that? This is a question for our panelists. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Saab, please, if you wouldn't mind answering that. I think you're on mute here.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, both countries are nuclear weapons countries. And as I mentioned and all, we don't have an elaborate doctrine vis-a-vis each other. And we don't have also a systematic modality for nuclear risk reductions. So, and we are right close to each other. There's no really warning time. So even on the basis of misinformation, that the other side is about to launch. And of course, the stabilizing factor is that neither of the two countries as yet has a first strike capability against the other. In other words, you can't completely knock out, neither India can knock out Pakistan, nor Pakistan can knock out India with a single blow. Anyone who starts a nuclear weapons war can inflict enormous damage, but not to the extent that it will protect itself from an equally damaging reply. Of course, now India, under guise of matching maybe China's nuclear capability, could be developing a first strike capability vis-a-vis Pakistan, and that would make it extremely unstable. And particularly if both countries, if one party achieved a first strike capability, then the other country would seek to have it. And whereas a second strike capability is stabilizing, the first strike capability is the most unstable nuclear scenario imaginable, because not only would it be vulnerable to any rumor making, fake news, etc., but it could inflict mortal damage on the others. So it would make sense, even without information, to be the first one to get in a strike, because otherwise the game is over. So that becomes almost a theater, and a deadly theater of the absurd, and that needs to be avoided. The only way, and that is a real possibility now. In the past, of course, it was a threat, a flashpoint. But now when you look on the path that Modi is embarked upon vis-a-vis Kashmir, which could lead to genocide, because anything less than that is going to result in a failure of Kashmir, a failure to suppress Kashmiri resistance and all. And were he to go back on his August 5, 2019 decision, it would be a good step in itself, in the sense it might enable, but Modi would certainly lose credibility to the extent that he would probably lose office. He already has an economic problem. He already has, because of Hindutva and other discrimination throughout India. But I mean, on the economic level, of course, he has a major problem. But were he to reverse himself on Kashmir now and kind of implicitly or explicitly admit that August the 19th was the mistake, August the 5th was a mistake, he could really, and BJP could lose out. So he's not going to do that. On the other hand, Pakistan, as I said, cannot stomach the costs, cannot bear the costs of a Kashmir solution being imposed through genocide. Yes, if the Indians were to vote for India, or even through a bit of chicanery, if they were to, you could complain, etc., but it need not lead to outright disaster. But if an Indian solution is imposed to the extent, as Genocide Watch has been saying, as others have been saying, as our speakers have been saying, then of course that will confront Pakistan with a situation which is extraordinarily bad, and the two being, so the only way to prevent it is for India and Pakistan to be constructively engaged on what might turn out to be a principled compromise settlement, primarily acceptable to the Kashmiri people, for which their participation would need to be ensured. And as I mentioned earlier, India would reject that, saying they're Indian citizens. In fact, they regard Azad Jammu and Kashmir citizens as Indian citizens, that's why they call it Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So they would reject it. So under these circumstances, actually, it is still possible to ensure that through modalities. You can have a set of bilateral talks which add up to a tripartite system of talks, but their participation becomes absolutely essential. And India does need to be convinced by the world, both through diplomacy and pressure, that the path they are currently embarked upon is leading to absolute disaster, and the world cannot stand for it, because, as I mentioned, and as all of you well know and have said so, that the global community has a stake, because 1 billion to 2 billion people could be impacted by any nuclear disaster between India and Pakistan. So that is the way to let the world know that this is, the nuclear aspect is a matter that has converted Kashmir from being a threat to peace to being an existential crisis.
Thank you very much. Mr. Qazi, that was a very detailed and very succinct answer to that. The next question is to our other panelist, Mr. Ranjit Singh Saab, that how do you think or do you envisage that the Kashmiris and Sikhs living in UK would join forces and have some kind of a political framework to work together?
Can you hear me, Ji?
Yeah, can you please go ahead? Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a very good question, and in fact, it replicates itself in the US, in Canada, in Europe, across the diaspora scenario. In the UK, we have actually done pretty well. The Sikhs and the Kashmiris have, for many, many years, I know this out of personal experience of working with my Kashmiri friends. For many, many years, we have jointly acted in terms of political and diplomatic support. Whether it's demonstrations outside the Indian High Commission, which we, invariably, we organise on a joint basis. And that actually brings me back to a point that I was making earlier about the need for solidarity, to ramp this up. Because as somebody who often organises these protests outside the Indian High Commission in London, I can tell you that the Indians are extremely irritated to see the Sikhs and the Kashmiris working together. So much so that we've had counter demonstrations being organised nowadays by the Hindutva lobby since Modi came to power. So there is scope to improve. We must improve because it will help the narrative. The world community needs to know that this is not the Kashmiris being difficult. It's not the Sikhs being difficult. There is a systemic problem here of a centralized state in India, which is denying self-determination to different nations and different peoples, principally on the border areas, whether it's Punjab, Kashmir, or on the northeast. So we can and we should, and if there is any scope to enhance this cooperation, I, for one, would endorse it and take it up.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. That's really good to know. I hope that continues. The next question is to our other panelists, Dr. Faisal. The question is, what is the way forward to convince the world community that 5-party agreement has to be included rather than just 3 now? Is there a way of convincing the world community to do that? Faisal.
Yes, I think it was already mentioned by a very important person. You might have heard the name of Dr. Madeleine Albright.
Mm-hmm.
She was the Secretary of State, and by the way, if people do not know, she was the daughter of Professor Joseph Corbel, who was appointed by the United Nations to be the first chairman of United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan. So she was on her way to China, and she gave a speech here in Washington, DC, and I still remember it was in the Reagan International Center. And as a Secretary of State, she said that I am going to be in China and we are going to talk about a lot of issues, and I also would like China to play a role in Kashmir. So this American involvement, and secondly, let me also tell you, you mentioned about this nuclear, and she is the one who initiated another meeting in Geneva. She was the Secretary of State, but it was a meeting only of P5, 5 permanent members of the Security Council. It was soon after India and Pakistan tested nuclear. And she mentioned in that meeting that we have to do something because now both India and Pakistan tested nuclear, because the bone of contention of this tension is the issue of Kashmir. So basically, America, Secretary of State will never say a word, Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Saab knows it, unless she really has the clearance from the State Department and Pentagon and whatnot, and particularly when she was going to go to China. And secondly, because China is very important, because I do not need to tell you what China is doing right now, but within the past 1 year, China has played a very, very important role in the Security Council. To tell you frankly, that we met with a lot of missions and a lot of embassies here. And one of my friends from Azad Kashmir, he said, why don't we seek a meeting with the Chinese mission? I said, China is big power. What are you talking about? Can China give us an appointment? I sent a request, and it was within maybe within a day or two that we have our delegation met with the China. So China has its own interests, and China is also for the peaceful resolution of Kashmir. So I think someone put in the question here, what can NGOs do? To tell you frankly, NGOs can do much more important role than the governments can do. And particularly for Kashmir cause, can you believe it, Ranjit Singh Saab is going to tell you, when Amnesty International speaks in the United Nations, the world listens, whether they can act on it or not, they listen. But here for the Kashmir cause, we have 7 internationally known NGOs making a joint statement, including Amnesty International, including Human Rights Watch, including Geneva-based International Commission of Juries and whatnot. So what I am saying, this is the right time for Kashmir cause. This is the right time because the global public square, I'm not talking about the global powers, but global public square is on our side. In fact, they have taken the stand, not because I met with them. They have taken the stand on their own because whatever way and shape they have really gotten the information. So if we really need to do something, that is to meet with the NGOs, because if we can do the NGOs update information, we have just one NGO, Dr. Irfan, you know it, in Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir Society of Civil Society.
Civil society.
That one NGO is playing a wonders. So we have the information from Kashmir. So the only thing is that we need to give it to the people who are really important and tell them really one thing. And I really appreciate what Imran Khan Saab said in the US Institute of Peace here. He was asked, what could be the possible acceptable solution to Pakistan? He said, whatever the people of Kashmir decide. So I think our approach should be, someone also mentioned the question, this accession to Pakistan and independence. It is really going to hurt us at this time. And I really appreciate what Khalid Bidwell said, right to self-determination. I am sure you are from Britain. Let me tell you, I took longer, but let me tell you, Professor Zafar Khan belongs to JKLF. He has absolutely no problem when we are going to talk about the right to self-determination, because it has to be unfettered. As Swami Nathan Iyer said, you go to India, you go to Pakistan, you go to independent. So Kashmiri diaspora can play a role by meeting with the civil society, then civil society can change the global opinion, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That is excellent, Dr. Faisab, as always. The next question is to the other panelists. Claire, that's a question for you. Are you making people aware of the Kashmir issue, that is just the people who are affected by this, or do you plan to widen it to the wider community in UK?
Yeah, I mean, that is my absolute complete plan, is to bring it out to the world. I mean, when I started this journey, I wanted to have the Worldwide Solidarity event from Kashmir itself. You know, Muzaffarabad was the only place. And so we were reaching out to people in different countries. And then essentially in trying to gather support for the event, I made connections with lots of different Kashmiris, whether in Indian occupied Kashmir, you know, in Azad side, or in the British diaspora here. So it was even all the people here, you know, it's brilliant to have that knowledge, get the links, the connections that we've got. It always all contributes to it. And so then my plan is to try and bring it out into the whole world, common people. But initially I brought it back to Scotland because it's ground that I'm familiar with. And so attempting to bring it out to the common people, really, because, you know, I had my eyes open to it on an abnormalcy of somebody not being able to contact their parents. And for me, it grew from that simple transaction. And I believe that the great British people and, you know, common people of the world, there are more people that care about humanity than don't. And if they don't know, they can't help. So that's what I'm hoping to do is, you know, I do believe a lot of them don't know. I think I would like to do some research, walk through Glasgow and ask people if I say Kashmir, what does it mean to them? It would actually be really quite interesting to see how many haven't. But the knowledge in my experience, in the best of my knowledge, that it's not out there. So yeah, that's what I hope to do, is take the message from the Kashmiris, widen their, louden their voice, raise their voice, and take it to everybody. That's the hope.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And this brings me, there's a lot of questions that have been asked. I think we will continue overnight, and we hope to conduct such similar webinars regularly, and inshallah, and those we will answer those questions. This brings me to the conclusion, and the conclusion has got just two parts. One is a very heartfelt thank you from myself, who belongs to Kashmir himself, to all the panelists, His Excellency Sardar Masood Khan Sahab, Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Sahab, very, very respected MP Afzal Khan Sahab, Dr. Ghulam Nabi Fai Sahab, who shares so much common with myself, Ranjit Singh Sahab, thank you very much once again for being a panel, and Ms. Claire Bidwell as well. I just want to leave on one single note. There was a discussion I had a few months back with one of my colleagues who happens to be an Indian, and he asked me this question. He said, Irfan, I understand all these fighting, and you're struggling, and you have this passion for freedom. But at the end of the day, India is a powerful nation, and you are a few people. And at the end of the day, you will have to submit. You will have to give in, and you will have to surrender, because that's just the nature of things. The weak surrender in front of the powerful. So I gave him an answer, and I want to share that answer because it just came out of the heart at that time. I said, let me tell you something about surrender. I said, it has been 73 years and Kashmiris have not surrendered. But let me tell you something what India has surrendered. To keep Kashmir under them, India has to surrender its democracy, its secularism, its humanity. Just to keep Kashmiris with them, India has had to surrender all the three things that it can ever stand for: its democracy, its secularism, and its humanity. So who is surrendering in front of whom? Who is the victorious? Who is the weak? And who is the strong? Thank you very much, everybody, once again. May peace and blessings of God Almighty be upon all of us. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Claire, God bless you. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Sahab, may Allah bless you. And Ranjit Singh Sahab, thank you very much. And we can talk later. And Dr. Gil Sahab.
Thank you, Dr.
Any last points or any last words from anyone else, please feel free to share.
Well, I think I was very impressed with your closing remarks, Irfan. They really were moving words, and as you said, coming from your heart, they really did represent an enormous reality. India is paying a huge price for its mistaken policies, and there are a few enlightened people in India, but they're being swamped by this Hindutva ideology, which is based on fanaticism and absolute emotionalism and frustration, in being unable to suppress the Kashmiri people. And it's been extended now, unfortunately, to other communities throughout India itself, which is a great tragedy. And so India will, I'm quite sure they will have to recover from this colossal, I don't know what to call it, a pathology. But hopefully if they do, then peace can begin to reign in the subcontinent.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, everyone, once again. Please take care of yourselves because of the COVID-19 as well. Thank you very much. May everybody be safe. Assalamu alaikum.